hesitate. We will destroy the Homo sapien.
We are in the middle of a collective psychosis of epic proportions, and it's so pervasive that it's not even that much of a part of our planetary conversation. And that's an expression of the depth of the madness that has overtaken our species. And it's nothing new. I'm just a translator for, so many of these traditions, spiritual traditions are saying this. Just as a modern person, I'm translating it into a psychological sort of metaphor or idiom. The origin, the source of the madness that's playing out in our world through the greater body politic is the psyche.
Expansion westward seemed perfectly natural to a lot of Americans in the mid-1800s. Like the Puritans before them, who had hoped to build a, quote, shining city upon a hill, pioneers believed that America had a divine or religious obligation or duty to stretch the boundaries of their country all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Independence had been won during the Revolutionary War, and then sort of reaffirmed during the War of 1812. And there was a spirit of nationalism that swept throughout the nation during the next couple decades that sort of demanded that there be more territory taken. They wanted to grow the country. So lots of settlers believed that God himself specifically blessed America and the growth of the country.
And they have all these metaphors for it. It's like this parasite of the mind. It's this virus of the psyche. It's not just metaphor in the sense that we have, we understand in the physical realm that there are these viruses. And this is a psychic virus. And it operates through our unconscious, through the blind spots, in such a way that we then become the instrument to act this virus out in the world. So we act out our unconscious in a way, so we become the conduit through which this, you can think of it as a higher dimensional entity, but it's not actually, it doesn't even exist. You see, we might experience it subjectively as an entity. That's our experience of it. But like I point out in the book, it ultimately doesn't even have any intrinsic objective existence at all, separate from our mind. And yet, here's this thing that doesn't even exist whatsoever, and it can destroy our species. And that's the paradox.
Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them.
And the thing about this virus, it operates, like I was saying, through the unconscious blind spot in such a way that it works through the projective tendencies of our mind, because we're always projecting. That's one of the ways of describing when people, say, oh, this is like a dream-like nature. Well, yeah, just like a dream is an ink blot, and whatever we project onto the ink blot, instantaneously, the ink blot shapeshifts and reflects back our projection, because it's not something separate out there. And it happens, in an instant. It doesn't even take a half of a second. It happens in no time, and then we become entranced by our own projections in such a way that we then think what we're perceiving objectively exists separate from us. So then we react to our projections. And that, in a sense, that's really the process underlying and informing the Wetiko virus.
Native Americans were considered savages or heathens, and a lot of Americans thought they should Christianize the tribes. American missionaries believed that they could save the souls of Native Americans, and they tried to do that. At the heart of Manifest Destiny was this belief in American cultural and racial superiority. Native Americans were perceived as inferior. Whites tried to, quote, civilize them, and that had been going on for a long time. Hispanics who had been living in Texas and out in California were also seen as backwards. So in conclusion, the term Manifest Destiny refers to the attitude, the very strong belief during the 1800s that the United States not only could, but that it should, because it was a religious obligation, that it should stretch all the way from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, regardless of who was in their way.
Long have we tried to extend our glorious empire out to the stars, only to be driven back.
We don't recognize our madness. It's an inner disease of the soul, and yet it explicates itself It actually expresses itself via the medium of the outside world. So that's an amazing statement. And what I'm pointing at is that somehow there's something in the psyche that actually is able to extend itself out into the world and configure events in the seemingly outer world so as to synchronistically express what's going on inside of us. And that's always happening, but with most of us, we don't recognize that. And then, like I was saying, we become conditioned by our projections in a way we become entranced as if we're hypnotizing ourselves. And that's just a very simple description of how Wetiko works.
Why is it that we don't seem to be able to adjust ourselves to the physical environment without destroying it? Why is it that in a way this culture represents in a unique fashion the law of diminishing returns, that our success is a failure, that we are building up, in other words, an enormous technological civilization which seems to promise the fulfillment of every wish almost at the touch of a button. And yet, as in so many fairy tales, when the wishes finally materialize, they're like fairy gold. They're not really material at all. In other words, so many of our products, our cars, our homes, our clothing, our food, it looks as if it were really the instant creation of pure thought. That is to say, it is thoroughly insubstantial, lacking in what the connoisseur of wine calls body. And in so many other ways, the riches that we produce are ephemeral. And as a result of that, we're frustrated. We're terribly frustrated. We feel that the only thing is to go on getting more and more. And as a result of that, the whole landscape begins to look like the nursery of a spoiled child who's got too many toys and is bored with them and throws them away as fast as he gets them, plays them for a few minutes. Also, we're dedicated to a tremendous war on the basic material dimensions of time and space. We want to obliterate their limitations. We want to get everything done as fast as possible. We want to convert the rhythms and the skills of work into cash, which indeed you can buy something with, but you can't eat it. And then rush home to get away from work and begin the real business of life, to enjoy ourselves. You know, for the vast majority of American families, what seems to be the real point of life, what you rush home to get to, is to watch an electronic reproduction of life. You can't touch it. It doesn't smell, and it has no taste. You might think that people getting home to the real point of life in a robust material culture would go home to a colossal banquet or an orgy of lovemaking or a riot of music and dancing. But nothing of the kind. It turns out to be this purely passive contemplation of a twittering screen. You see mile after mile of darkened houses with that little electronic screen flickering in the room. Everybody isolated, watching this thing, and thus in no real communion with each other at all. And this isolation of people into a private world of their own is really the creation of a mindless crowd. And so we don't get with each other, except for public expressions of getting rid of our hostility, like football or prize fighting. And even in the spectacles one sees on this television, it's perfectly proper to exhibit people slugging and slaying each other, but oh dear no, not people loving each other, except in a rather restrained way. One can only draw the conclusion that the assumption underlying this is that expressions of physical love are far more dangerous than expressions of physical hatred. And it seems to me that a culture that has that sort of assumption is basically crazy and devoted, unintentionally indeed, but nevertheless in fact devoted, not to survival, but to the actual destruction of life.
And this is part of what makes this, phenomenon just really actually dangerous, because in an effort to perhaps awaken or help people step out of their own self-destruction, they're not only unable to see it, but they're also resistant to the efforts of others, perhaps, or any, efforts of help or healing whatsoever. And, speaking of resistance, something that I think we can bring up right at the start here, because it plays such a big role, is that while some people are deeply asleep and that carries with it all sorts of things, but many are awakening, but in their awakening, they are trying to deal with the insanity of the world in ways that are actually not conducive, but actually fueling the Wetiko itself.
You are a virus. You destroy the world. Everything beautiful you poison. You drag us from our homes, you rape our daughters, murder our sons. You crack our spines and do all you can to break our will. You stab us. Then you put the knife in our hand and tell us it's our fault. And if you don't do it yourself, you stand by, close your eyes, and pretend there's nothing wrong. And then you pray to your God to silence our screams so that you can enjoy the happiness that we built for you with our blood. But it's not your fault. It's the only way you know how to be. And the only thing that will change anything is if another virus comes along and does to you what you do to us.
Please stay where you are.
Because the thing about Wetiko, it actually will inspire us to act out in ways that don't serve us, that are actually, contrary to our best interest. And so that's just really interesting. I just wanted to say that because I think we can all have the recognition that, like when we're acting out our addictions or our habitual patterns, we know they're not serving us, but we do it anyway. So that would be an example of that. The thing about Wetiko, by operating through the blind spots, it operates through the part of us that actually reacts to our projection. So when we see Wetiko, say if we see the evil playing outside of ourselves, which, it's all around us, and if we react to it from an unconscious place with the best of intentions, with like this self-righteousness of, I want to, I'm on the side of justice and I want to help and I want to bring world peace and I'm a political activist really wanting to, be compassionate. But if we're reacting out of our unconsciousness, we're actually unwittingly, even with the best of intentions, feeding Wetiko, because Wetiko, it feeds off of polarization, okay? So that's why some of the best people I know, they're spiritually, very, very interested in spirituality. They're political activists with the best of intentions, but they're unwittingly serving as a vector to actually feed the disease that they're fighting against. And so that's one of the ways that Wetiko then, because it actually is contagious, and it'll propagate itself in a non-local way through the field via people's unconscious reactions to it.
Society thinks they're safe when bingo, hard drive crashes from the rending. A lot of hackers tried viruses before, vaporize your text like so much whiteout. I want it where file replication is a chore. Lights out, shut down entire White House. I don't want just a bug that could be corrected. I'm erecting immaculate design. Break the nation down section by section. Even to the greatest minds, it's impossible to find.
In other traditions, they'll have, they'll give these names to Wetiko, and they'll say, these are like a master of deception. That's what these entities are. So, because if you think about it, we ourselves are like these geniuses at deceiving ourselves. And one way of understanding that, because we all do it at certain points in our lives, but, we can tell a lie and we can start to believe our own lie to the point where we don't even know we're lying. And then we're in denial and we're in denial that we're in denial, and it becomes a feedback loop, and we can't see it because if we see that we're doing that, it would blow our whole gig of being in denial. So then it becomes like an autonomous self-generating process of deceiving ourselves. And if I'm deceiving ourselves, and if I've told myself a lie and I believe my own lie, there's a certain charisma I have that's very convincing to other people. So that will easily entrance other people to like actually fall under my spell and to have an agreement with me. And you see, the thing about Wetiko, it can absolutely affect an individual person, but it's a mistake to just think of it as a pathology that, oh, that person has and I don't, or other people, we don't and they do, because it's a collective psychosis. And it's important to understand that the evil of Wetiko, it works through the collective process, through a group, through a species, through a nation. So that's the way that it will actually propagate itself. And so that's kind of why it's important. Yeah, any one of us at any moment can get taken over by it and can actually, in a sense, embody the disease. But if we see a person in that state, and if we think, oh, well, they have Wetiko and I don't, well, Wetiko, if you remember, I said it feeds off of polarization, it feeds off of separation. So the idea being, if you see somebody who's embodying Wetiko, if you have the understanding, oh, and they're a dream character. Dream character is in a dream. Any character in a dream is an aspect of ourselves. If they're a dream character, they're actually an embodied reflection of that sick part of me. Then all of a sudden you've cut through the separation and you're actually engendering compassion. And compassion is really the energy that really dispels Wetiko.